And again, so if that's the camera for the two of us, that's the camera for the one of you.
All right, we're broadcasting. You're listening to Seattle Neighborhood Crier, and today's producer is Chaz. It's all yours.
Yeah, good evening, good afternoon, good day. Chaz Redmond, community engagement advocate here in West Seattle, and I have with me today my guest is Deb Barker, and Deb is a uh, retired city planner, and today's topic is just exactly what zoning does to us as residents, workers, people who live and get about the city. Why should we care about zoning, and what are the things that we can and can't do about it? So a little bit about yourself, Deb, and then
Sure.
I'll ask the first question, I guess.
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Chaz, for having me on this show. I used the title of retired land use planner. I was a planner at the suburbs south of West Seattle for 21 years. I actually started there as an intern and worked my way up, and but I retired 2 years ago because I wanted to come back to my West Seattle roots, if you will, and do things that mattered to me and give back to my community. While I love doing my job down south, I am having a wonderful time working citywide here in Seattle on a variety of issues that include helping neighbors out, or helping my fellow community members out with trying to figure out what this land use stuff is all about. So I feel that I can help folks dive into those things called zoning reviews or zoning code. Maybe not the zoning code, it's a pretty hairy zoning code with the city of Seattle, but we can look at zoning maps, and we can look at how to engage when you see a sign on a property and what that means. So I'm having a great time doing that in my retirement.
Well, thank you, Deb. That's lucky for Seattle and unlucky for uh, that major suburb to the south, whose name shall go unnamed, if you will.
At this point, sure.
Right. So I've got a few questions about zoning in general, and just to set the stage, I'm going to hold up a color map of the city of Seattle's zone system. And we hear all the time people are talking about I guess there's a perceived tension between developers and people who own property, and the most property owners are homeowners, and so the yellow on this map are the single family zones of the city. So tell me a little bit about how is the city broken up in zones? We have a lot of single family zones, but where are the other kinds of things? Where do business districts exist, for instance, or where can I put a gas? If I was a developer and I wanted to put an apartment, or I was a businessman and I wanted to open a gas station, how would I go about knowing what to do with that, and then how would that affect the people who already lived there, for instance?
And zoning has been in the world as let's just imagine a world without zoning, and that would mean that if you owned a piece of property, you could do whatever you wanted with it, whatever floated your boat. Maybe you were building a boat or putting in a big, maybe you were tearing apart huge tankers, and that property that you owned was right next to someone who maybe was had a residence. So years ago, communities developed zoning to, many people just say separation of uses, and that grows into what we have of zoning maps today. It makes sense to have things in nearby places. So if I own property, or if I'm looking at property, or if I live someplace, I'm probably going to maybe want to know what my zoning is, and that's where you come to the City of Seattle zoning map. and that may tell you things that you've got neighborhood commercial, or you've got single family, or you've got, I'm just looking over at the zoning map there with lots of different mixes: single family, residential, small, low rise, mid rise, high rise, neighborhood commercial, regular commercial, downtown commercial, industrial, Pioneer Square. There's a whole lot of stuff going on here. And each zone is going to mean that certain uses can go on in that particular zone, and it's also going to mean that certain things don't happen in that zone. Things that are slated for, if I look on this map coming up on the screen before you, you see something that's like a magenta, downtown harborfront it's called. Well, really, anything that happens in downtown harborfront really is only going to happen in that particular zone. And but you take something like that bright red that's all around Lake Union and all around the waterways, and that gets into, that's a commercial zone. Sure, commercial zones can be maybe they make sense in nodes, maybe they make sense grouped together instead of spread out all over the city. So that's why you see kind of that intensity of those commercial zones. Buffering all this then, and these colors really are meant to kind of step down in intensity. If you look at your pale yellow, you see that that's single family general colors. But even within the single family zone, there's different densities, and that's why you have single family 5,000, single family 7,200, and single family 9,600. That means that your lot size, your minimum lot size, is going to be one of those ranges. And those ranges for single family zone, for your commercial zone, all of those were set up by the city and by every city as it develops. You don't decide, oh, I'm going to slap single family 5,000 next to downtown mixed. It's a thoughtful process to put together a zoning map, and it's a thoughtful process to take a look and make sure that the zoning that you've got is in the right place for the needs and the uses that you have, and that you've got enough capacity in all those single family zones and all those residential zones to handle all the people who, or to accommodate all the people who want to move to Seattle and live in Seattle.
So one of the things that show up on this map is there are concentrations of looks like olive and red, and those are mid-rise and commercial zones, and those look like they're on like Lake City Way, for instance, or Holman.
They're going to be on arterial streets,
okay.
on those busier streets. Something that is obviously super arterial would be Interstate 5 or Highway 99, but then your street categories kind of break down, and you put your more intensive uses like your shopping centers or like your supermarkets and on and on. You want to feature those along those arterials so that there's more ways for people to get to them. Let's just say the streets are bigger to get to those places that everybody typically needs to go to, such as a grocery store, such as your commercial shopping area where you're going to get all your dry cleaning done, and even where schools are, you're going to want those sometimes typically near those arterial streets. And then it sifts down, if you will. Your kind of next less intensive uses would be on maybe your secondary arterials. Good case in point, if you look over, we're real close there to University Village, and you can see the University Village is on some, not quite on some arterials. It's near the university, but then the uses shift downward from that high intensity commercial to where you get commercial where you're also allowing some residential, and that's where you get in with your low rise or mid rise some of your high-rise, but you start sharing those uses, and also your neighborhood commercial. You start sharing a use, and you don't have just a pure, it can only be commercial or it can only be residential. So that's a way of, again, accommodating growth, accommodating housing, accommodating the need for commercial uses, but you start sifting down and sharing those uses together.
So if let's take a case of two different kinds of people, perhaps.
Okay.
Maybe a student coming here for graduate work at the University of Washington who might want to find an apartment or might want to live in a group house. It looks on this map like the university area is set up for low rise and no, I don't see any mid rise. So they would have maybe 2 or 3 floor apartment buildings that they would be able to choose from. And what about the houses? Does single family zoning allow, for instance, like a group house? So,
well, and let's talk about that, because some of the zones that you see, maybe you'll see, which is very typical in the university district, you will see in those neighborhoods a lot of what appear to be single-family houses. And those houses are sitting smack dab in the middle of a zone that allows multiple houses on one lot. Single-family house would be one house, one lot. But when you have one lot and you allow multiple houses on that lot, or multiple, let's call them dwelling units, which is kind of the industry term, if you will, then it may appear there's a disconnect. If someone says, I'm going to buy a single-family house, but my zoning is multifamily, what's going on with that? Now, you need to remember that the city and its planners took a look at what the needs, the long-term needs are of the city for housing and for commercial uses, and they set up the zones not to match what's there today or what was built, say, in 1910, a single-family house, but they're looking at what they would like that area to become. And that area, perhaps, as we're talking about the university, around the university district, we're looking at something that needs to become dense and needs to have houses that maybe get converted into apartments, so that you take and you densify that. Or maybe those houses are torn down and they start to build 1 and 2 and 3 story apartments to accommodate the growth needs. And that's where you're going to see things that maybe not, what's on the ground doesn't always match what this map says. I know a lot of folks kind of get hung up on that. Well, I see this house that's right next to another house and another house, and they all look like there should be single-family homes. That's great, but you need to understand what the zoning underneath that house or underneath that property sets you up for. If it sets you up for it's forever single-family, or is it really a multifamily, and there's flexibility to change that single-family house and densify it. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Chaz, but got off on a tangent there.
So if I were to purchase a house, then one of the questions that I really should be asking the realtor is, what zone is my house located in?
Exactly.
Right? So tell me, I mean, a single-family zone, clearly only a single-family unit could exist there, and on this map, I guess they are those that are designated as little green squares. But there are areas where the word low-rise shows up, and it suggests that townhomes are possible, or row houses. How does one go from single family? What is the scaling process? Is that something that the city has thought about, for instance?
The city has thought about it, and actually sometimes the city has thought about it after the fact, because as all these blocks were, remember, Seattle hills and forests when all the settlers arrived. And as the city developed, you'd have somebody come in and buy a big chunk of land and clear all those darn trees and say that I'm going to take my land and subdivide it. I have one big piece of property, maybe it's 10 acres, 50 acres, and I'm going to turn that into a residential subdivision, and I'm going to make all these wonderful little rectangles line up with some streets. And based on when that land was subdivided or platted, if you will, for instance, my lot, which is in a platted neighborhood, is 4,800 square feet, 4,800 square feet, yet my zoning is 5,000 square feet. And that's because back in probably the 1880s, when my property was developed, that was the size that particular developer made all his lots. There was no possible standard, explicit standard set up then. So you have your zoning, your underlying zoning that's going to be maybe 5,000 square feet. You're going to have the reality of what was platted by the developer, who's going to generally be in the ballpark of maybe a 5,000 square foot lot, or maybe it's 5,200 square foot lot. That zoning counts for all of those. But you need to understand, and your realtor needs to understand, what does that zoning then get you. If you do have the single-family zoning, single-family 5,000, 7,200, 9,000, or maybe the residential small lot, even though single-family means one residence per lot, there are provisions in the code to have more than one dwelling unit on that lot, no matter how small it is. And that's a whole separate section of code that I probably don't want to get into today, other than to talk about mother-in-law units are one of those things that are allowed in a single-family zone. And so you can have two actual dwelling units on one lot with the process of mother-in-laws. Right. That's just one of the mechanisms, and there are a couple other ways that will.
And are those kinds of things, for instance, if the neighborhood that I live in now is pretty much all single family, and there's been a lot of redevelopment. Some of these homes were built very poorly, and so they're fairly cheap and easy to take down.
Doesn't take long.
And the new structures clearly are larger than the old structures. What process is open to both the people who wish to develop the land and to those who are adjacent? For instance, if I wanted to take this house and substantially increase the number of people who could live here, what would I have to go through to do that?
A couple good questions you got there. So to take this house and add to the number of people who want to live here, interestingly enough, the definition of family, and right now we are in a single family zone, so that means one dwelling unit per lot, and in that dwelling unit would be a single family. The definition of family is actually up to 8 unrelated people.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So that explains a lot of houses that are rent houses, that are college student group houses.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different terminology out there, and you really want to, if you're going to talk about different things, such as you use the word group houses, and I use the word mother-in-law apartments, you don't, because there's lots of different ways to define something, you'd probably want to go back to the City of Seattle website and look up definitions for these sorts of things. But you could have you could have unrelated people living in a house that is in a single family zone, and that is perfectly legal up to a certain number. Some people rent their homes out for that use. Others maybe have an extended family that they need. You know, they've got 8 folks. Actually, they may have 10 folks, and because they're all related by blood, that again can be legal. So you can increase the number of people who live in your home without getting special permits if you're going to be within the range of density that the zoning allows. Again, single family, what's the definition of
Right.
family? Multiple family, you go back to the definition of family, but then that allows you, the multiple allows it to increase tenfold.
Could I take the property, for instance, and let's say I, as an owner of a piece of property, I had a very old house, and and it was in a single-family neighborhood. Would it, if I were to wish to develop something along the lines of maybe a row house, could I do that, or would I have to go and what would I be able to do? For instance, there's probably, this is a corner lot that I live on here. It's a little bit, actually it's about 1,000 foot less than the 5,000 square foot, but it looks to me like I could put possibly 3 or 4 adjacent, actually touching each other structures that had probably 1,000 to 1,500 square feet each, which would be reasonable size townhome. What would I need to do if I wanted to develop this hilltop into like a complex of 4 townhomes that were touching each other?
And again, you're going to go back to your zoning, and you're going to understand what your zoning is and what is allowed in that particular zoning. In this case, you're up here in RS or in single family 5,000, correct?
Right.
And that is going to allow you to have, if you are subdividing or taking your one lot and splitting it, chunking it up into fewer, or rather lots, chunking that up into more lots that are smaller than the 5,000 square foot, you're going to want to follow along the city's provisions for developing within small lots. It's not something that, oh, I'm just going to jump in and have a I want to take my land and make it smaller. There are provisions that you'd have to get into within the subdivision code to make your new lots smaller than the underlying zoning.
But it would be possible to do that if I were to...
If you met the code standards
Right.
for doing that.
So,
And I'm not as, I don't get involved too much right now as a retiree. I don't get involved too much
Right,
with
lucky you.
knowing that. And if we ever had somebody from a city south of us, I'd be able to tell you how well that could fly.
so that's actually another interesting question, and that is Seattle is surrounded by a really large number of actually really large municipalities that are all contiguous to each other,
Yes.
and yet all of them have different zoning,
That's
and,
correct.
and we see that most directly here in West Seattle with the line on Roxbury as we see the zoning code of King County at
Unincorporated
large,
King
right?
County.
So how do cities or municipalities or counties, how are these kinds of zoning variances and zoning strangenesses, how are they accommodated? Do adjacent municipalities look at each other and try and work together?
The long-range planners who are taking a look at the zoning and what may need to be tweaked to meet a goal, they're not going to operate in isolation. Even though the zoning map looks as if this Seattle is just floating all by itself, and there's nothing to the north and nothing to the south. We all know that these roads that we can see on these maps, they bring us, you really honestly can't tell when you go out of the city of Seattle and into unincorporated King County or what is it? I don't even know what's north.
Shoreline.
Shoreline. So
right, at
so
145th
it really
becomes Shoreline.
looks so similar. Sometimes there'll be a sign, you're like, oh, okay, I'm in a different city. Maybe the speed limit changes, something like that. But, and again, that's a goal to take a look at the the needs of the area, where you need to have any growth that's appropriate, or whether you need to accommodate for more housing or more this or more that. You're setting that up. You've set the kind of the parameters of that up quite a while ago. So Shoreline and City of Seattle, they knew what zones were going to be where. Maybe, let's say Seattle had it set up, and when Shoreline became an actual city, which it did well after Seattle did, the planners there looked and said, okay, we already have a continuation, or we have a commercial area here. It makes sense, instead of putting industrial right next to that, probably makes sense to just kind of continue that commercial area onto our or Shoreline's land base. So that you don't operate, as you plan this stuff, you do not want to operate in isolation. You don't want to create chaos as you have inappropriate zones next to each other.
So we've talked a lot about the impact and effects of zoning on people who live here. What about people who work here or who want to start businesses? There seem to be, certainly the red areas are commercial, and I expect that commercial probably means just that, commercial. I could have like a garage there or something. What if I wanted to open up a shop on the Ave, University Way? There are definitions that restrict the kinds of businesses that I could operate on that. Is that true?
There are, and maybe a good case in point to just throw in our discussion here, and I'm only going to keep it, I need to keep it broad because I have not studied it in depth in any way, shape, or form, is our new marijuana laws. Where are those marijuana shops? They're not going to be in residential zones, probably. They're not going to be next to you in a single-family zone. But then they're also, when each city sets up its rules for marijuana sales or marijuana, what do they call it? Making. What is that? Construction.
Right, growing.
There we go. So all of those different things that are allowed under Washington law, those had to be looked at as far as what they are compatible to be with, and what they're, maybe even more importantly, what they're incompatible to be with. So there you start getting, thank you, some marijuana zoning restrictions. This section of the Seattle's website is going to tell you where, probably it's going to tell you more so where you're not going to be able to locate. A separation clauses, such as making sure that there is, whether it's 1,000 square feet or not square feet, it's you want your separation how the crow flies, so 1,000-foot separation or 2,000-foot separation. You need to know, if you're looking to operate something that may be restricted, you need to know not just what your property zoning is, but you also then need to know what's around you. What's around you within 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, because you may not be able, even though your zoning may be absolutely perfect for what you want to do, if there are some separation requirements for your particular use, you need to know what's around you so that you're not going to run amok and say, wow, even though my zoning's great, a block away from me is a school, and I cannot be putting my new marijuana sales facility there. So pay attention to not just your particular property, but any regulations that your particular use that you want to put on your property has, and know what's around you.
So a lot of us have noticed, and maybe it's because it's favorable to do so, but SoDo area has become a magnet for the food preparation industry and catering industry. And are there, because we obviously have restaurants in all of the neighborhoods, restaurant must be an allowable use in most areas. Are there differences between restaurants and commercial kitchens, for instance?
There are probably going to be those minutia differences, and in some cases a commercial kitchen may only serve people. You may never ever get to go to a commercial kitchen because they're going to take all their food and send it out. Say something that's going to service. I think of Gretchen's, of course, as one particular example. You get Gretchen's, of course, all over the place in your little boxes, whether you're at the airport or whether you're downtown and at Safeco Field. Any of those things, you're going to get that use. But I'm honestly thinking, have I ever sat down at a Gretchen's, of course? And I think possibly at one point I did. But so you see that there is a difference between that
Right.
food preparation versus your actual restaurant, where yes, food is prepared, but it's also consumed at that restaurant.
So there are probably additional requirements for customers who eat in,
Correct.
as in having restrooms and things like that.
Correct. I do recall that I had, and that gets into not only City of Seattle codes, it gets into when you're talking food, you have to remember that you're going to be dealing with the King County Public Health Department.
Okay.
And I was remembering that a project that I had years ago where some folks were wanting to open a kimchi factory or kimchi production area. It was that particular building that they found, which they, really was perfect for them. Unfortunately, that zoning meant that they also had to have a place to serve that kimchi as well.
Oh.
They couldn't just make it, they had to serve it. And that presented some problems for them. That then also brought in different levels of King County Health Department for your food safety, not just the production of it, but then also the actual consumption.
So from the point of view, let's say I'm new to Seattle and
Mhm.
I've come here and I want to start either a house or a business. Both of them, I think, would take me to the Department of Planning. And so I guess the question is, how am I going to get, is there a single place in the city or the county where I could go as a residential builder or a commercial builder where all of these secret interactions would be known to me, or is it just part of the process that you learn as you go?
I want to say that there's a one-stop shopping for all this, and it is. There is a really great website that has a lot of information on it at seattle.gov. But I, even after 20 years of being a land use planner, heck, I had trouble sometimes finding stuff on my own website. It's like, where the heck did they put that? Or when did I last see that word attached to something? And so it is important to take a look online, but also, if you can, head downtown and talk to folks about your particular issue. Talk to, if you're just showing up here in Seattle, as you said, Chaz, and you're going to build something, obviously somebody had to sell you something. Maybe you had that real estate person involved. Talk to them about who to talk to. I always have encouraged folks who are starting off for the first time, jumping into whether they're building a home or starting a business, to work with people who have done this before. You're not handing everything over to them, perhaps, but maybe you're taking enough time to have them help you and learn what they can offer and learn what they can learn from their experiences. That's always something that I've encouraged folks to do. Don't just jump into it, because if you do without consulting with folks who have done this before, and if you've never done it before, you're going to be paddling for a long time.
So basically, land use is not something that you go in without
It's not
a
for the
lot
timid.
of due diligence.
It's not for the timid.
So let's move to the next level, I guess. Now that
Okay.
we've talked about what you can and can't do with the actual area, the land, once, either as a resident or as a businessman, once I've decided that I want to construct something and
Mhm.
I've found that I can do this,
Mm-hmm.
so what limitations? Clearly, the the location will determine how high I can build something. So I think in single family, the height limit is either 28 or 35 feet, depending on the type of house. And in low rise, the city has recently changed some of the height allowances in the low rise 2 and low rise 3 and low rise 4. And typically those had meant stories, but now that's just a sort of a placeholder to allow possibly 2.5 floors. And
that's an important thing to realize. There's always the joke, how many people does it tell you to, if you take a 2-story house, how many people will give you the same answer and how tall it is, and no one will agree. Absolutely no one will agree because of the way that things are defined. Again, so you want to go always back to the codes that are in effect, and you want to understand, well, what is a basement? What is something that's below ground counted as? Is that a story? Does that count in my volume of home? For if I have a maximum volume of the house, does it count as a story? Does it count as living area? What about under your roof? What about the pitch of your roof? If I have a flat roof, do I get the same amount with a flat roof that I do with a pitched roof or something that isn't flat? Lots of different ways to look at the volume of a house, and we haven't even talked about side yard setbacks and lot coverage. So.
Oh, right. That's the tricky part.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that I was going to build something on an arterial,
mm-hmm.
And that it was going to be, let's say, I don't know, a small, modest, let's say low rise 4. So I would expect to have 4 floors and maybe some accommodation for a roof deck or something. And I found myself, I've purchased the property, and I've found a banker, and
mm-hmm.
we've purchased the property. And now I've found an architect, and I'm going to actually set about to design and configure the building. Am I free to do whatever I want? What are the limitations there, and what do I have to do to make let's say I wanted to do one of two things. I wanted to do it according to the law, and so what are those steps? And then say I wanted to go a little bit further, and I wanted to make everybody who was going to be a neighbor of mine really happy. What would be those steps?
Well, depending on the size and also the size of project that you're doing and the location of your land, there may be requirements that you are having public notice of your project. For instance, if you're building a single-family house in a flat, non-floodplain, non-liquefaction, non in the middle of a lahar area, you may not need to be having any public notice, but maybe you take that single-family house and you're going to build that single-family house in the middle of a steep slope, or in the middle of a stream, or in the middle of a wetland, or all those sorts of things. Those environmental factors of streams and wetlands and steep slopes and lahar areas, even though I think that's probably more related to Sumner, city of Sumner, but those factors of how you impact the environment are going to trigger additional types of review, and that type of review is very public, and so you're going to be looking at having public notice. You're going to be looking, in many cases, at dealing with something called the State Environmental Policy Act, or the acronym for that is SEPA, S-E-P-A, and that SEPA, and again, as you're seeing the website, the map around us, you'll see that the map is showing you a lot of these areas that may be considered, wow, not nice, flat, easy places to build. They're going to be maybe considered critical areas or hazard areas because of, or environmental areas because of uh, wetlands and streams and steep slopes and liquefaction and one of my favorite terms, just plain old lousy soils. The soils would rather be flat instead of on a hillside, and so it's always going to be sloughing off or sliding. So when you have a project, whether it's commercial or residential, that you're proposing in some of these areas, again, that are really mapped out nationwide, but here in Seattle we've got really terrific mapping on the City of Seattle website and also on the King County website for those who are outside of the City of Seattle. You're going to have extra requirements when you are developing those lands. And that's just a fact of doing business on those properties. You're going to have public notice. You're going to have the different types of things you can have are public notice, where you're going to be, when your application gets submitted, you're going to be notifying property owners within a certain distance that I'm doing I'm proposing this action. If there's an environmental step through the State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, you're going to be putting up a big sign that is meant to be seen by everybody so they can know what's going on. And perhaps you'll also have a public notice requirement of sending something in the mail to everybody who lives within a certain, say, 300 feet of that property.
And when I do that, or when that's required, and people comment, where do those comments go? Do they go back to me, or do they go to the Department of Planning, or?
They're going to be going back to DPD, Department of Planning and Development. They're going to be going to the person who is reviewing that particular element of your project. So if it is an environmental application and someone writes a comment letter, they're going to be sent not to you, but they're only going to go to the planner. I believe that a responsible developer will, whether it's single family or commercial or multifamily or anybody, would always want to know what sort of public comments are coming in. And they're going to be all over the place, but they are not automatically forwarded on to the developer.
So one of the things that I would do then that was extra to make people happier would be to request those comments and then to incorporate the suggestions, I suspect, into at least a response.
That would be awesome if you did that. That would be, I would give you gold stars.
We must have developers of that quality here.
I'm sure that there are. Other things that can happen with that comment, with the comments that you receive, a developer could say, wow, I'm going to maybe sit down and have a meeting with folks and understand it more than just what this email says. Or a developer could also go completely the other way and say, wow, I am not required to abide by anything but city code. I am meeting city code, and my city planner is making sure that I'm meeting city code, whether I disagree or not, and I don't have to engage with this community. I am meeting the code. That's all I'm required to do. So a couple different choices.
Right, and that seems to be perhaps one of the causes of some of the issues that we see between some communities and some developers, is that there's a gulf that doesn't seem to have been bridged by either side.
I think possibly some folks have expectations, have unmet expectations, and other folks would have never had those expectations in the first place. But they're not all operating with the same goal.
And does the city,
expectations?
The city never steps in between, or does it?
Well, again, the city is there to make sure that the codes are being followed, and that something is not, that whatever is permitted is corresponding to codes that are in effect at the time that application came in. The city is required to have this public notice because of these critical areas, and I appreciate your comments, but they may not rise to the relevancy of changing, not clearing the land. Maybe the bunnies will come back and eat the grass or something like that. But am I trying to say? It's a delicate line that everybody walks, and everybody wants to understand where everyone else is coming from, and you don't. I found the most successful developments and appreciated projects are where there is communication, where there's communication going on between folks who are developing and folks who are adjacent to that and possibly impacted. While they may not agree, the fact that they are communicating and letting each other's expectations be known, I think is useful.
So as a city, and so once again, just to show, I guess, the overall zone map here, there's something like 38 urban villages and urban cores and neighborhood centers, and more than 76 actual distinctive neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So how...
Beauty of Seattle.
Exactly. I mean, Seattle's a city of neighborhoods, one of the best in the country.
Uh-huh.
So how do these community organizations get involved in understanding and working with the city to sort of shape the development and evolution of their own neighborhood?
And that's a really good question, because there's the city started out with not a whole lot of response to the neighborhoods. When I first moved here, the city was in full swing of realizing, wow, we want to engage neighborhoods. This is crucial. This is important, and the Department of Neighborhoods was formed. Through the Department of Neighborhoods over the years, they had really helped neighborhoods take on plans and come together and focus their energies, not just as an individual neighborhood, but also as a part of maybe a larger, today would be, say, a larger urban village or something like that, or a larger region of the city. And a lot of what Department of Neighborhoods did with respect to enabling all of those individual areas to come together went under a lot of budget cutting. Some of the responsibility then for individual planning went back to the Planning and Development Department, and fortunately, I think Department of Neighborhoods still is able to stick its nose in enough areas and say, let's remember that we can help you all come together. So I do fortunately see a shift that bringing back Department of Neighborhoods into the larger focus of this will be good. Even something like who's issuing grants for neighborhood improvements. That's not going to come out of DPD per se. It's going to come out of Department of Neighborhoods, or perhaps it's going to be coming out of Department of Transportation for infrastructure improvements, or sidewalk improvements, fixing your sidewalks or putting bike racks in. But as you have Department of Neighborhoods and you have Department of Planning and Development, you have Department of Transportation, they should be working together to help each neighborhood plan and unite and have goals and understand what the requirements of that neighborhood are, such as an urban village. I would usually like them to be just a little bit more organized in their communication levels.
So the 38 urban villages were the city's response to the Urban Growth Management Act.
Correct.
And most of well, it's hard to say. We've had a couple of discussions on those topics, and we've learned that certain areas, Ballard, Alaska Junction, Broadway area, Central District, Uptown, are just exploding with all this new incoming development and all the residents that are going on there. So that's markedly changing, as we all have noted, frankly, markedly changing the actual character of the neighborhoods. And So all of these, let's just take Ballard as an example.
Okay.
There's probably a dozen new buildings on 24th and Market and 20th that have gone up around the library in the central,
Right.
old part of town. And none of them, I mean, they're individually attractive, I suspect. But when you look at them in the aggregate, there seems to be and I don't mean to disparage anybody who lives in Ballard, but there seems to be a boxiness to them which does not appear visually attractive from any distance. And so how does design review occur, and how can we, I suspect my question is, how can we improve the end result of design review?
Design review is one of my passions. I served for 4 years on the Southwest Design Review Board, and I would willingly serve on it for another 4, 8, or 10 years, but the city sets up a 4-year cycle for folks to serve, to volunteer actually, for design review boards. The design review board is going to be in specific neighborhoods, and it's going to take a look at projects of a certain level and of a certain size, of a certain use, and in a certain zone. It's going to be looking only at those projects, and it's going to be evaluating them against the current design standards for the city and that zone and that use. It's going to be evaluating them in a public forum, if you will. There's going to be other projects that maybe in Ballard weren't large enough, or the use was different, that did not rise to having a public design review process. Now, that doesn't mean that the design review never happened. In those cases of a smaller project, the design review would have been done by a planner on an administrative level, typically. But for those projects that are undergoing that public design review, there is a section on the city's website for the design review process and discussion about the design guidelines. It even has information about who the boards are and when their meetings are. There's great ways to find out about a project and actually look at the plans, hopefully look at the current plans of what's proposed up front before the meeting occurs, because as a design review happens in a public forum, all these design review board members are going to be meeting in a public place, and the public is invited, and it's a very set process of an architect making a presentation, the board asking clarifying questions. The public then gets an opportunity to comment on what they're seeing and give feedback about design-related issues. And then the board will go back, and in that same meeting, there can be long meetings, that board will deliberate and tell the architect and the planner what of the goals and what of the design standards are the highest priority for this particular project, what's maybe medium priority, and what's right, what's good about what they're seeing and how it fits in the community and how it responds to the community's design standards, and where there's room for improvement, or where, you know what, that drive-through is not allowed here. Something has to go. So the design review board is making that recommendation to city staff based on what happens at the meeting, what they hear from people who attend the meeting in comments, and what they hear from the architects and the presenters of that project as well, plus also using their own expertise as planners or architects or landscape architects or people in commercial business, real estate, etc.
So these design review boards are basically by neighborhood, and there's 6 of them in the city, sort of split along with the police precincts, I believe. Can citizens get
Maybe some.
Are there? That's
All
even
right,
better.
I'd have to go back and check.
Are citizens, because it's all volunteer, how are these design review boards? Do you apply and then get selected?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And each design review board has a combination of, the city has a goal to have each board have a combination of certain expertise, so that you don't have one board has 5 architects on it. You always want to have that neighborhood representative and a business representative, architect, get landscaping. So whether you apply, when you apply, you are vetted again by the city, and if perhaps maybe they have need for your particular expertise in an area where you don't reside, that's fine. That you still are offering your professional expertise on your subject to an area that has that need.
So, and you say it's a 4-year term, so that allows
terms, yeah.
Allows for both a continuity and I guess an evolution, because I presume some of those terms would be alternating.
They are alternating and layered, and you'd hope that there'd be continuity, and sometimes it works better than others.
So, as a retired planner, do you think the process, as it has evolved to where we are today, has become well enough known that the citizens throughout the city would go to a design review, or is there something that we need to do to get more people involved in these? Because everybody seems to have an opinion, and yet you have a process which clearly can go on and on and on. I'm familiar with the Admiral Safeway, for instance. I think went through 5 different design review board iterations. I'm sure there are others throughout the city that have gone, equally long. So that seems like a relatively engaged process between developers, the board, and whoever shows up, business or community.
Yet at the same time, you'll get people who live a block away and they say, I had no idea there was this sort of process going on. How come I wasn't informed of this?
So how can we fix that part, I guess, first?
And that's always going to be a tough one, because perhaps at the time that the public notice was sent out, that person didn't live there or didn't own the property. If something is sent out to, if a notice is sent out to a property owner, maybe there's someone who rents and they don't know about the public meeting, even though the owner of the property, who may live someplace else, does know about it. You are going to get people who maybe they see a sign going up and they're on a phone pole that says public notice, and they are on that. And then there are other people who will engage only when it's right next door to them. Sometimes people don't know that sign on a phone pole is not just a band announcement. It's something that involves their neighborhood, and that's always tough, because you don't want to have big, huge billboards all over the place saying, "Hey, something's happening here." You have to have a fair way to get the word out. It really puts the people who live there, it makes them incumbent. They're responsible to pay attention. You can find out about this stuff if you are looking about you and noticing, oh wow, maybe I see a for sale sign. Something may be happening in the future there. Pay attention to any nearby phone poles. Take a look at maybe your newspaper is going to have a notice, or for those who don't have newspapers any longer, there's lots of different ways to find out what's going on. Even some libraries are going to have public notice boards about some things that are going on. Pay attention. Don't just assume because it's not a big billboard that's going to identify something's going on that you don't need to pay attention.
And you don't know where it will happen. For instance, in this single family, this SF 5000 neighborhood here, there are those notice signs, public notice of a parcel, I guess, which is being subsplit into 2 or 3 additional parcels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and there is always a number and a contact person to connect with.
There is on the public notices, and all these notices are going to look the same. And that's one of the things that you really kind of have to get used to, is that it's going to look like a bunch of gibberish. And you have to take time to read through this notice and go, okay, I don't understand a lot of this. Maybe I don't understand any of it, but I'm looking for something that's a project number. Now remember, that may not be on the front page. That may not be at the very top. Maybe that's at the bottom of this notice that you get. Don't just assume because it looks like some bureaucratic something that it's not important. If you think you can find a file number and a staff contact and a brief description of what this project is, score. You're going to get knowledge out of that, because that'll get you a long way.
Excellent.
But it's not easy to find sometimes.
Well, we're probably, we've spent almost the entire time talking about just a very small part of the city's zoning and code system. So we'll leave it where it is now, but clearly we should come back and we should go a little deeper next time on things like your neighborhood, things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do if you wish to protest? How do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Are there hearings when there are differences of opinion?
How you can participate,
right,
so you're not sitting there feeling like
something's helpless.
Yeah, I'm helpless. No, you're not. You have ways to engage, and you're responsible to be aware that the times they are changing.
Well, I want to thank you, Deb, an awful lot, and I may, in fact, even invite you back again.
I'd be glad to.
This is a very smart city. We have a lot of things that we're learning in real time, by the way, and a lot of those include zoning. So that's it for this session of Seattle Neighborhood Crier. And we'll pick up the topic of zoning and impacts to neighborhoods and growth management on future programs as well. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Chaz.
All right, and there will be the links to the pages in the show notes at seattlecrier.org. All right, thank you.
All right, excellent. Thanks.